Alan and Melissa Bell, and this is our story so far. I came from a wonderful Christian home. My parents weren't perfect. They were regular people who loved Jesus and taught us to love Jesus too. They never divorced, never separated, and always loved us and each other. I became a Christian on Easter Sunday when I was 6 years old. During high school, I went on a mission trip to Mexico. It was the first time that God grabbed my heart for missions. During my sophomore year, I felt God's call on my life into full-time missions.
I also come from a long line of godly men and women who love Jesus and serve him at every opportunity. I gave my heart to Jesus as an 8-year-old boy at an altar call at a late summer citywide crusade at a high school football stadium. I attended every activity the youth group planned, served on the youth leadership committee, and every summer went to Matamoros, Mexico on mission trip and graduated high school at the very top of my class with the intention of dedicating my life to full-time Christian vocational ministry. I never drank, never partied, didn't even kiss a girl until I was a senior.
Alan and I met in college. I was smitten almost immediately, but I had to wait a full year for him to break up with his girlfriend. We dated for almost all of our senior year, and we were talking marriage before we graduated. He decided to spend 2 years overseas doing mission work before we got married. The second year that he was living in Hong Kong, I moved to China and taught at a women's college. We finished up our short-term mission work and were married almost immediately upon returning to the U.S. Keep in mind that 2/3 of our dating relationship had been long distance. Getting married was a real eye-opener for me. Like any bride, I had visions of wedded bliss. Though I thought I was a strong Christian, I was consumed with perfectionism. My deep-seated pride began to surface, though it took me years to admit it. I hear a lot of women say that they fell into the trap of worshiping their husbands. Not me. I wasn't like that. I expected him to worship me. I wish that I could say we had that wonderful honeymoon period, but we never did. It was rough from the beginning. Marriage was so different than I ever pictured it would be. He seemed so distant and dissatisfied. I couldn't imagine why he was so unhappy with me. I'm perfect, right? I didn't know why we were so unhappy, but I knew that something was wrong. And of course, it was all his fault. I immediately began to work on him. I wanted to change him into that person who would worship me, serve me, and love me unconditionally. The more I tried to change him, the farther he pulled away.
Melissa and I moved to Thailand in 1997 to begin our missions career. I became the treasurer for the East Asia region of the IMB, and with that move, a perfect storm began to develop. I had been a good church boy through all my high school and college years, not once buying a girly magazine or visiting a dance show or strip club, or even a bar for that matter. The internet was a new thing in 1995, and I remember the first time I snuck into the living room to get online while Melissa was sleeping in the bedroom. The images took forever to download on my dial-up 9600 baud modem, but I sat there with eyes wide to absorb the explicit material that had been largely absent from my life to that point, and I found myself quickly drawn to it, compelled to connect as if I had no control over it whatsoever. And over the first years of our marriage, I learned all kinds of evasive tactics, such as how to wipe viewing history and clear caches to hide my viewing activities. I became a master at deception and cover-up.
Alan first confessed the pornography to me one Sunday afternoon after we had been married about 3 years. It made sense, but I was in complete shock. My world had been shattered. So what did we do about it? I took a shower, got dressed, and we went and had dinner with friends and didn't say a word about what was going on, joking around on the outside about nothing consequential and dying on the inside. I thought we weren't that bad, so we pasted on a smile and faked our way through the evening. From that point, we coexisted, separated roommates who couldn't get divorced. We lived as much of our lives together as was expected by the mission community. I stuffed in my pain. I would occasionally explode with tears and spend 3 hours listing the ways that Alan could fix himself. Instead of seeing how I could serve him, I saw him as someone to be fixed. I was so concerned about how I felt and what I needed that I missed my opportunity to love him unconditionally the way I so desperately wanted to be loved by him.
I remember the first night I was actually confronted face to face by the sex industry Thailand is so infamous for. I was completely unprepared and caught off guard as I was alone and approached and offered sex. I was unable to say no. Very quickly, this became habit and routine for me, and the cycle of addiction began to play itself out. Frustration led to fantasy and obsessing. Loss of control led to guilt, and then cessation, only to become frustration and start again. The cycle went round and round over and over again, making my head spin. I was overwhelmed with the dissonance between my life in the daytime, serving God and making his name known to the nations, leading Bible studies and encouraging believers, serving our missionaries and God with almost every part of me, and the secret dark places of my life, which were in direct opposition to everything I knew to be true and right. What was I thinking? I would ask myself after visiting a massage parlor or surfing the internet. This is the stupidest thing I have ever done. But you deserve it, my selfish, inner narcissistic self would tell me. It's been such a hard day and it's so cheap. No one will ever know. Just cover your tracks and don't worry about it. But I did worry about it. So much so that I began to lose all sense of time. I was late to appointments. I canceled meetings. I wasn't sleeping. I was on anti-anxiety medication to get me through the day and sleeping pills to get me through the night, and my life was spinning completely out of control. This went on for more than 10 years.
Gradually, confessions started coming in, a little at a time. He told me about a few times, but I knew it was more. Over the next many years, I became an expert at knowing when he was cheating and an expert on convincing myself it wasn't happening. I was a full-blown codependent. We went through the same crazy cycle again and again. I would suspect and ignore. He would confess and promise over and over.
I began seeing a counselor. We both did. We got help. We went to marriage seminars and retreats, read books on marriage. At one point, I even participated in an exorcism, hoping to purge myself of this evil which had so easily entangled me. I thought that if I prayed hard enough and read my Bible enough and squeezed enough faith out of the white-knuckled grip I had on life, that God would hear my prayers and cure me of this disease. He is certainly powerful enough to do it that way and has done that with some people. But I found that with most people and with me, he chose to purify with fire.
During this time, I began a ladies' Bible study by Beth Moore called Believing God. One of the stories was read about a father with a sick child who asked Jesus, "If you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." Jesus confronted him on his lack of faith and replied, "Everything is possible for one who believes." Immediately the father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." God began to work in my heart in a very serious way. Even though I had been a Christian for a very long time, I never really understood what faith was. Over the next year in my journey to develop real, deep faith, I learned that his unconditional love for us wanted more for us than to only live for our own gain. I clung to the scriptures, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Slowly, God was transforming my life and changing me to love him more and think of myself less. Alan's and my marriage began to improve. We had our first son, Jason, and I thought we were finally through it. I thought we finally had a marriage that could glorify God. Looking back, one huge red flag is that we never told our story. Except for our counselor and his wife, we never shared what had happened. And as a result, we never had the community of Christ to help us.
In 2005, we moved from Thailand to Hong Kong with our 9-month-old son. I was stoked that I could once again live in the greatest city in the world. I was also mistaken in that I thought I could leave my sin behind in Thailand and start fresh in Hong Kong, where sex was not so easy to get and not at all affordable. Only on this new role, I traveled a lot all over mainland China, conducting internal audits and helping our missionaries establish and maintain business connections. Even though the IMB has a policy of always traveling in pairs, on those trips I found it very easy to disappear in the evenings into the city where no one knew me and find anything I wanted. Massage parlors, bar pickups, whatever. Coworkers traveling with me never suspected anything and frankly never asked me any questions. I always had some story to tell them, some feasible lie to cover my tracks and explain where I'd been. No one ever questioned me, not one time.
I began seeing the signs of infidelity again when our youngest son, Danny, was about 6 months old. Hong Kong is a wonderful place, but very hard with 2 small children. We lived in a high-rise apartment on top of a hill that was not easy to get to. Alan was racked with terrible insomnia. I had the beginnings of sleep apnea that wouldn't be fully diagnosed until Danny was 3 years old. I was physically exhausted. I literally didn't have the physical strength to deal with the warning signs of infidelity. I ignored it. I confronted it one time, and it went something like this. Is there anything I know because you're kind of acting like you used to act before? There's not anything, right? He had no choice but to lie to me. I even found evidence in his wallet. Another lie. I didn't believe him, but I pushed away my concern and continued to ignore it. We went back again to our old patterns of coexistence. He was gone so much. Even when he was home, he wasn't home. By the time we came back to the U.S. in 2009 for furlough, I had nothing left. I remember the walk through the airport to get on the airplane. I could barely walk. I was numb. I felt nothing except fatigue. Oh, is that me? Sorry to call it. We had been in the U.S. for about a month when we went to a conference where we met God. I mean, seriously, met God. It was called Catalyst, a gathering for Christian leaders across the U.S. Excuse me. I had never met people who were so honest and raw. It was in stark contrast to the fake lives we were living among, excuse me, I'm so sorry, among our missionary colleagues. My husband began to change in front of my eyes. I couldn't believe the transformation. Little did I know that our world was about to fall apart.
In September 2009, while on furlough here in Rockwall, I attended my first ever man church at Lakepointe's Rockwall campus. I remember it vividly because that was the night Pastor Steve wore a snorkel and goggles and a big pair of blue flippers. I don't remember exactly what the topic was that night, but what I heard loud and clear was that it was time to get serious about tackling the addiction once and for all. I prayed and asked God that night to reveal to me what I needed to do to be free. A month later, Man Church invited Pastor Nate Larkin to speak, and I was blown away. His story was my story. A minister of the gospel himself, he shared about how God had pulled him out of pornography and sex addiction. And the way God did it was through confession and accountability, step by step, one day at a time, in community with other believers. It was October 14th, 2009. I stayed up all night crafting an email to a few very close friends and coworkers who were all living in Hong Kong at the time. I confessed to them that I was a sex addict, explained exactly how that was playing out, and asked for them to help me overcome it. Their reaction was understandably one of disbelief and hurt, but also one of resolve as they met together over the following days and prayed for me and worked out a plan to help me. But it didn't go down quite like any of us had envisioned it. 2 weeks later, while on vacation in Colorado with my family, my parents, my sister, and her husband, I received an unexpected phone call from the home office in Richmond, Virginia, stating that it had come to their attention what had been going on over the last few years, and that my services overseas were no longer required, effective immediately. I was not given the opportunity to explain or to appeal or to share my story, how I had confessed and was seeking help, and working out a plan for recovery. I was given 2 months severance pay and was told if I wanted any of my household furnishings and things from Hong Kong, I should arrange to retrieve them as soon as possible. What a blow. I had been terminated from missionary service for failure to uphold the standards and conduct expected of missionary personnel. I was not given the opportunity to resign, and the circumstances and reasons for my termination were fully documented in the minutes and read aloud at the next board meeting. To pour salt on the wound, Melissa was given the opportunity to resign in good standing and was sent a letter from the president of the organization thanking her for her 15 years of faithful and dedicated service. I was devastated. My career was over. It was uncertain whether Melissa and the boys were going to stick around. They had every right biblically to leave me. I had no money, no job, no house, no car, and no friends, or at least that's what I felt. But in the midst of the brokenness, God had plans for restoration. Melissa did not leave me, but vowed to stay with me through the challenges. I was in a very dark and depressed state. It was the lowest point in my life. On my 40th birthday, I was unemployed and living with my parents.
I remember the moment in Colorado he told me everything. For the first time in our entire marriage, I didn't want to fix it. I didn't want to fix him. I knew that I had no strength to do anything on my own. Nothing. I was empty. Looking back now, I realized that God had emptied me out, not to crush me or hurt me, but to work through me. He couldn't use me to serve my husband before because my pride was in the way. Now I was truly a vessel. I was able to love him and stay with him out of God's strength, not my own. I realize now that all those many times of confession before, I had never forgiven Alan. This time I did. For the first time, I offered true forgiveness for the hurts he had caused.
The few members at Lakepointe who knew what was going on were extremely gracious. They allowed us to stay in the mission house the church provides for furloughing missionaries for an additional 6 months after my termination. They even helped me earn some income working in an administrative capacity here at the Rockwall campus for a few months and provided reduced rate counseling services through the Lakepointe Counseling Center. I started attending Recovery for Life that meets at the Rockwall campus every Thursday night. I think it's called Regenerate. There I found that I was not alone in my addiction. There were other men, a lot of other men, with similar struggles who did not judge me. And I began to find freedom from my addiction for the first time. You see, I learned that the key to recovery is community. Authentic, real, raw, honest, trusting community. Through the 12 steps of recovery, I learned that my life had become unmanageable and that only Jesus could restore me to sanity. I found that only by working through the pain of the addiction alongside others to guide and support could I finally have freedom. I learned about forgiveness and how resentment and bitterness are the killers of recovery. I learned that God has a plan to use me and my story for his purposes. My experiences are my credentials and the authority to minister to others in similar circumstances.
That next year of recovery seemed like a dream to me. I do not know how I made it through except that God carried me step by step. When Alan and I started our support groups, for the first time, we got real. I mean, really real. It was intense. It was ugly and messy. We hurt, and I cried almost every night for months. We learned the art of arguing as we finally shared true emotions with each other. It took almost a year for Alan to find a job. We had to move in with Alan's parents. The boys really struggled with all the transition, and Alan was in depression from the long job search. Our family wanted to help, but just didn't know what to do. The closest I ever came to leaving Alan was during that time. I went for a long drive for a heart-to-heart with God and told him I was willing to go or willing to stay. Just tell me what to do. He gave me a peace that I needed to stay. I wish I could tell you that I had the Jesus warm fuzzies, but I didn't. All that faith that God had built in me was put to the test. God didn't get our family through this by making our emotions better. We got through it by putting our faith into action, even when our emotions didn't follow. We just simply believed that God was in control and that we had to trust him no matter if it ended the way we wanted it to or not. God gave us strength to continue with our therapy. There weren't 5 easy steps, and it did not happen overnight. We kept working and growing, and God performed a miracle. It wasn't a miracle that was apparent right away. I didn't know the miracle was even happening until one day I turned around and Alan was sober for more than a year. No pornography or infidelity. We were talking, sharing, and loving. We were speaking nicely to each other and communicating on a deep level. And if you know us, you know how much we love to laugh, and we laughed a lot. We love and respect each other. I adore the man that he has become. He truly inspires me every day that God can redeem lives and marriages.
Today, I'm 8.5 years clean of sexual sin. Only by the grace of God and through community at Celebrate Recovery and Reengage has this been possible. Melissa and I continue to work toward a healthy marriage. We have openness and honesty in our communication, and God continues to amaze us with his blessings. In 2011, we moved to North Garland and began attending the Firewheel campus, where I now teach a young adult life group on Sunday morning. We led our second closed group at Reengage Firewheel. I've been back to China 6 times on Lakepointe mission trips, where I had the opportunity to serve alongside former colleagues and work with university students. I have a job working as a program manager for a mobile device management company in Plano. God has blessed Melissa with a teaching career, and she's awesome at it. My boys are in 5th and 7th grade and thriving in school, and we live in Saxe. Accountability for me looks like this. My electronic life is an open book. Melissa knows all passwords and has access to all electronic devices at all times. I've given her the right to ask me accountability questions about my time and activities and thought life without her needing to fear of hesitancy on my part. I didn't realize how much stress and anxiety it caused me and how much energy was invested in covering my tracks until I was freed from that burden by becoming an open book. With a son starting puberty and the other one close behind him, we have set an open book culture in our home for everyone. No one is allowed to be on a device in private. I have guys that know my story, whom I meet with regularly. They also have the right to ask me how I'm doing and expect an honest answer. When I travel to China, I make sure at least one person on the trip knows my story and holds me accountable. My favorite verse in the whole Bible is James 5:16. So confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. For years, I tried to find healing from my addiction, but I was trying to do it on my own. I saw some mediocre success, but it was always falling short and winding back where I started. It was not until I realized that I could not do it on my own, and I brought it out into the light that I finally experienced freedom from it. The verse is true. Confess your sins to each other. Bring them out into the light. Don't keep them hidden in darkness. Expose them among trusted individuals who can help you with them. It's true, your faith is deeply personal, but Jesus never meant it to be private. We must live in authentic community to experience true freedom from the sin that entangles us.
Reengage is amazing. It is the best tool for marriages that I've seen. And trust me, as much therapy as we've been through, we've gone to a lot of marriage seminars and read a lot of marriage books. But at the end of the day, Reengage will not save your marriage. You can use the best set of tools in the world to put up the frame for a new house, but without a foundation, that house will fall down. There is only one foundation that will support your marriage. It is Christ, the cornerstone. Believe him. He wants your marriage to glorify God. Thanks.
Thanks.